To say thank you for the introduction, Claire, but I don't know whether I can endorse the way that you had a good swipe at most of my parliamentary colleagues there. So for the record, I don't endorse that. But thanks for having me. Really pleased to be able to talk about Blue Labour here today, and particularly to talk about socialist economics and that element of Blue Labour being the one that is lesser known. I think because we stick out from our Labour colleagues a little bit more on the cultural and social issues, we don't get the opportunity to actually talk about socialist economics. And I think that's key to distinguishing us. And there is a very big distinction between Blue Labour and Reform. So for those of you who are not as familiar, Blue Labour is an explicit challenge to the neoliberal economic consensus that we've been living through for the last half century. We're about a socialist political economy with an industrial strategy at its heart, actually making things in Britain again, imagine that, prioritising the labour interests over capital, taxing assets rather than actual work, not having a taxation system that seems to reward asset ownership rather than actual working class jobs, and actually taking back control of the British economy. I think that's one of the key things that we want to talk about more, is actually having the levers to shape the economy in the direction that we want, which politicians of different stripes have given up control of over recent years. And I wanted to touch on what Johnny talked about. The loss of working class voters has happened over decades. I think some of my Labour Party colleagues perhaps like to blame one particular leader, one particular era, etc. Actually, it's much, much deeper than that. And it's not the fault of any one leader at all. And bear with me here. I think we've been both not left-wing enough and too left-wing. And what I mean by that is that we haven't had a socialist political economy. We haven't had that agenda for a long time. And actually, working class voters really do want the government to steer the economy in a particular direction to protect their interests rather than being the managers of neoliberalism. So we haven't been bold enough in our economic radicalism, but simultaneously, and this is where the left-right kind of distinction has become actually more about kind of, I guess, a liberalism kind of access. We've been far too left-wing. We've been way away from our voters on the cultural and social issues. So just to give you a little anecdote, I remember this was quite close to the general election last year, speaking to a constituent on the doorstep, and, Keir Starmer's ruthlessly put his stamp on the party after the Corbyn years, and the guy says to me, I couldn't vote Labour anymore, far too left-wing. And, for someone who sees politics through the kind of economic prism, primarily myself, left and right, that seemed odd. But then he got on his knee and made that BLM signal that we all became familiar with from 2020. So we've both not been left-wing enough and actually far too culturally left-wing for the working class to continue supporting us. So, Reform. Well, in many respects, I think Reform is a Thatcherite party. So if you look at the people that run Reform, if you think about Nigel Farage, Richard Tice, Zia Youssef, they've all been members of the Conservative Party at one time or another. And actually their critique in many cases of the Conservative Party is they haven't been free market enough. They haven't really been the Thatcherite zealots that they want them to be. And of course, the key thing is now they understand working class interests enough that they realise that's not popular with working class people. So that's why you actually see them making these noises about Thames Water being in public ownership, saving British Steel before the government actually went on and did it, to its credit. But if you think about those kind of policies, they are not necessarily what you would think of as being what Reform leadership would actually want to be doing with the economy. So I think there's a very clear distinction there on the economics of Blue Labour versus Reform. But as I say, I think the people who run Reform are savvy enough to understand that they are a very long way from agreeing with the economics of the working class. So Blue Labour, much closer to the working class and the working class interests than Reform. But where is the leadership? Well, there's reason for optimism for people like me. I was watching the conference speech that Keir gave a few weeks ago in Liverpool with Maurice Glassman, and we were there nodding away. we were nodding away at large swathes of what he said. Not everything, but large swathes of it. And it's about actually having a blue Labour government indeed, not just in word. And I think there have been blue Labour noises, absolutely, during this parliamentary term, but we haven't been radical enough in moving in that direction. So actually, we're ending up hacking off our progressive activist base, but we're not actually, in many cases, winning back those working class voters with the kind of blue Labour values that I think we need to embody. And there's a real kind of tension in the Labour Party around the idea that some of these people are gone. And I could understand that, but my colleague David Smith, who's also a Blue Labour MP, puts it brilliantly, which is that if we think that going on to an ex-council estate, actually people are quite hostile towards us and, you know, we're thinking about writing them off, and we should go onto those new build estates and look for voters there because they actually would vote for us, former Tories, etc. We've completely lost our way. We have to think about what the Labour Party is for, and no matter how difficult that pivot is going to be, the maths of this kind of front against Farage from all the Liberals, we're not even sure that makes sense. It didn't work in 2016 or in 2019. So building that coalition, I'm not sure the maths of it even makes sense. But morally, from the perspective of the Labour Party, we have to be the party of the working class, no matter how difficult it is to pivot back to it. Very quickly, to summarise, I think Blue Labour is the best representation of working class interests. If the Labour Party embodied those values, we would win a lot of those people back. But it is this Labour government that has to embody that. And what I would say is, 2019, we nearly didn't have another chance. The Tories' implosion in 2022 and the way that their votes split to reform and so on gave us one last chance. So let's take it.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.